And we are live. G'day everyone, Mike Jeffrey here, and you are listening to My Creative Journey, episode number 17. To all you new listeners out there, hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to stop by here today. As I said, my name is Mike, and I'm a wedding photographer from Sydney, Australia. Each week on the show, I bring you guys along on the highs and lows of my own creative journey, and share all the knowledge that I've gained along the road to building my own freelance business. In today's episode, I'm going to be speaking all about priorities and knowing what comes next along your journey. This podcast is as much a learning tool for me as it is for you guys, and prioritizing my work has always been something that I've struggled with. One of the toughest parts about being a business owner can often be knowing what to do next and having insight to plan ahead. So in this episode, I want to touch on a few things that I'm going to start doing moving forward in order to better prioritize my work. But before I jump into that discussion, I want to talk about what has been going on for me this past week. And as you guys probably know from hearing last week's episode, I did shoot my first wedding last weekend now, just over a week and a half ago. And I've still been working quite a lot with editing those photos from that wedding last weekend. And so I've been very much still involved in the process of that. I feel like it's sort of the rollover effect where I still feel like I'm actually working that job because I get to relive all those memories from the day here on my computer every morning. So I feel like I'm still very heavily involved in that. And it's been a very nice experience really for me because I get to relive that day, and something that I really enjoyed was being able to be there on the day and being able to interact with so many different people and actually see the experiences that other people were having and see the expressions and see how they were reacting to what was happening on the day. And I think it was just such an enjoyable day that I'm glad that I get to relive now, and it's got me so excited to move forward and go and take photos of my next wedding because I just really so enjoyed that experience. I think it was never something that I thought that I would enjoy, and I think I touched on this last week, was I never thought I would love that interaction with other people and being there and having to speak to all the family members and all the other guests at the wedding. But I actually really enjoyed that, and I enjoyed the experience of being so involved with those two people and feeling like I was actually there as someone who was invited on the day to their wedding. So that is something that I really enjoyed, and being able to experience it with them was just so special to me. And now being able to relive all those memories, I think, is just such a nice journey. And I'm so looking forward to being able to present them with their images because I just think there are so many great ones in there, and I think they're really going to enjoy all those memories. And to think that just over a month ago they weren't going to have a photographer at their wedding, to me just blows my mind because I see all these images now and I just see the impact that they can have. And I know from being a photographer for quite a while now that images can have such a lasting impact. And for me, I sort of understand that on a more deeper level because I sit here day to day and sort of look at images from in the past and can quickly relate and jump back into that memory for myself. And so I can only imagine if you were a part of that experience, what these images would do for you. And so I'm just so glad that I'm able to give them these images, and I hope that they can spark that sort of same memory and that same experience that they were having on the day in them, and hopefully it will allow them to remember that occasion for many years to come. In all of this hype around the whole wedding experience, I've been really caught up in the fact that I don't actually have a lot of work or very consistent work starting to roll in because, as I've shared on the podcast before, I think I've told you guys I've got 4 or 5 more weddings already booked in, but only 3 more for the rest of this year. So, and all of them are at the end half of the year. So I'm going to be hanging on quite a few months now until I get to do my next one. And it's really got me feeling a bit like I don't know what is the next step for me because I'm really enjoying the process, but I'm in the same boat where I don't know what to do next, and I don't know how to go and actually find more work because I know in this industry it's a very long-term industry, and you don't sort of you book a wedding photographer in within 6 months of actually being married. And so to think that all of my work is going to have to be next year, I just don't know what I'm going to do with the other half of this year, and I'm really trying my best to put word out there and trying to get it in front of the right people who potentially there are people out there who haven't booked photographers in for their wedding this year, and I just am trying to get as much out there as possible. I've really tried to step up in my marketing and trying to put images in front of the right people, as I said, because that is one advantage that I have, is being able to market my services in a way that can be appealing to people who at first thought may have not seen photography as that much of a priority. And so that's something that for them they've had to push down the list. And so with the fact that my services are priced fairly below what the industry standard would be, based on the fact that I don't have the experience that anyone else would have, I hope that that can sort of drive someone to say, well, we weren't really wanting a photographer, but if they're there at this sort of price point, we can sort of justify it. And so I've been trying to get that word out in front of the right people and trying to be able to get more work, because I just feel like I want to show people the importance of this type of work. And it's become very apparent to me, and I know I've spoken about it before, in the fact that people would forego this type of service because of the price, or because they don't think that it's a necessary service. And I'm just trying to educate people as much as I can through social media and other things like that to be able to show them that this is something that is very worthwhile, and show them that it's a quality investment, because people, understandably so, as we spoke about in episode 15, don't want to spend their money on anything. And I can totally understand that, and I don't want to just tell people to throw their money away, but this is not something I think is throwing your money away. And I've got to come to that and sort of educate them on the reasons why, and hope that by showing them that, they will respect me and accept the work that I've been trying to do, and sort of hand me that chance in a way. So that has been something that I've been trying to work towards, but as I said, it's been hard to sort of know what the next step is and where everything is sort of leading to from here. That's all that I'm going to touch on in regards to my work for the past week, because there hasn't actually been a lot. I've just been trying to work hard and try and actually put the hours in editing all these photos. But I wanted to touch on now a few messages that I got through the past week. And I always appreciate when I get messages from anyone who listens to the podcast, or anyone who is at all interested in any of my work. But in particular, I want to speak about messages they got in regards to the podcast this week. And I got a couple of messages from people saying that they've been really enjoying the podcast, and they were saying that they'd already listened to every episode of the podcast and really couldn't wait until next Monday for the next episode to be released. And that, to me, was surprising, first off, because I think I always just sit here and record the podcast as if there's no one else on the other end. It's very easy to do that because it is very disconnected from anyone else, me just being here in my room. There's no one else around, so I am basically just having a conversation with myself. But I never put the pressure on that anyone is actually on the other end, actually listening to any of these episodes. So to think that people are responding to things that I'm actually saying in the episodes actually proves to me in my head that they are listening to the episodes. And it sort of surprises me in a way that you would want to sit through all these episodes. I'm not saying that they're not worthy of listening to, but for me, it's just very strange that anyone would be on the other end, because it doesn't really feel like it's a episode of a podcast, you know what I mean? So having anyone reach out to me, I always appreciate that, and having them let me know that they're actually listening to the episodes, because it can seem very removed for me until I do hear from other people that they've been really enjoying the episodes. And I had a particular message from someone through the week who said that they were able to gain so much from the episodes, even though the stuff that I was talking about wasn't directly related to them. They were able to draw a lot of different comparisons. And for me, I found that very rewarding, but I also found it very interesting in the way that these careers that we are all on and the journeys that we're all trying to take in life are all very parallel to one another. And you can sort of draw comparisons and take bits of advice from different people. And it's something that I like to do in my life. You know, the types of things that I listen to on podcasts aren't necessarily related to the photography industry, because I don't really enjoy spending all my time and all my spare time just indulged in the photography industry, because there is other things out there in the world and I need to appreciate that as well. And so drawing things from other professions is something that I love to do, and listening to people and people who are experienced in other professions and have sort of made their own journey in that sort of way, and trying to draw things from them and take little bits and pieces of advice from them, I think is so important. So to hear that anyone else could do that with my podcast was just crazy to me. And I'm so thankful that anyone would tune in and be able to give the podcast an opportunity, because I enjoy making these episodes, and I know from hearing from other people that they've been really enjoying them as well. And so that is just such a great thing that they've been able to actually give the podcast a chance and really gain something from it. And I'm glad to have them on now as a long-term listener. And I hope that everyone who is here is able to stay a long-term listener, because I can only feel these episodes improving, and I hope you guys are as well. Speaking of podcasts, one of the other ways that I sort of gain information, as you guys know, and as I've spoken about before on the podcast, is through reading books. And for me, it's been a bit of a journey because, as I've said before, I don't really enjoy the act of reading. It's not something that I overly enjoy, but I think recently I've started to enjoy it a lot more, because I've started to work in audiobooks in my sort of reading schedule. So I sort of alternate between reading and actually listening to the book as well, because I've been really looking for something to actually listen to that is a bit more continual, that's a bit more of a longitudinal sort of story, because I love to listen to podcasts and I listen to them when I exercise and when I'm at work and things like that. But I feel like an hour episode is over and we're on to the next thing and there's no sort of interrelation between episodes. And I really enjoy that, being able to read a book and that the storyline is sort of continual and we're sort of always learning things and it's the same sort of style the whole way through. So it's fairly easy. And I've really enjoyed audiobooks over the past couple of months because it sort of brought back the enjoyment in why I actually read books, because I'm able to draw a lot more out of them based on the fact that the audiobook is a lot faster than I can read. So hearing that and using that in times where I'm just working away and not actually thinking too much, so I can have it on in the background, or when I'm exercising and just listening to that, it really allows me to absorb a lot more from the audiobook, because I find most of the time when I do actually read a book, I get to the end of the day, I'm in bed trying to read, but then I'm just way too tired to even read. And it's just not something that I really want to push through and compromise on my sleep based on wanting to read an extra 5 to 10 pages in my book, when I could just hear it in the audiobook in the morning. As you may know, I'm still listening to Grit by Angela Duckworth, and that book has been really amazing. I've really enjoyed it. It's been one of the ones that I think that I will go back to. There's not heaps of books that I think, oh, I need to read that again and I need to sort of go back and read that whole chapter again, because there was just so much information in that. But I think this book is one of those ones, and one of those ones where it's just a different way of actually writing about something, and I really appreciate her style and her background, where she comes at it from a very scientific perspective, and I really enjoy that. And she actually gives a lot of information in there as well. And I think one of the things that really resonated with me was the point that she brought up, that effort counts twice. Now, this really goes back to one of the things that I was talking about, I think it was episode 11 maybe, in saying that I'm not the most creative person that I know. I'm not the most skilled photographer out there. I wasn't born with any skill in that area, but I do think the main skill that I do possess is passion. And that's something that's always been at the front of my mind, in knowing the reasons behind why I want to do what I do, and the reasons about why I'm applying myself and why I'm in this career. Because I think for me, it wasn't something that I really had to do. It wasn't something that I thought, oh, I'm so skilled in this area, I have to go and do that. You know, I've always had skill in this area, but it's been something that I've really enjoyed. And I think enjoyment and being passionate about something has really allowed me to drive my creativity forward. And so when she said that effort counts twice, I really thought that was so important, because I think too many people think that skill is the most important thing in any aspect. And I think that a lot of people tend to think that people are born with more skill than other people, and that therefore leads them to be more successful than anyone else. And whilst I think that skill certainly comes into it, I do think that effort does count twice as much as skill. You know, I think that if you're willing to apply yourself, you can definitely outperform anyone, no matter how much skill they've got, if you're willing to apply yourself enough in the right areas. That idea of skill and natural born talent, I think, is something that does hold a lot of people back. And I hear from quite a few people who would like to go and do other things. And I've received a lot of messages from people saying, how do you start something? How do you go and start your own business? How do you go and start your own journey into something? And I think that people are scared because they don't think that they have the skill. They're like, I'm not up to that standard yet. I'm not ready to start. I'm not ready to take that first step because I don't have all these skills that other people have. And I think whilst the fact that you're comparing your skills with someone who you may not even have met before, I think is probably the wrong way to go about it in the first step, because what people can portray online is very different to their actual skill level. And I think being overly confident about something can portray you as having more skill than anyone else. So online, whilst they may seem like they have more skill than you, they actually may not, and you may have more skills than them anyway. But I think beside from that, and removing that out of the equation altogether, if you're actually passionate about something, and if you are able to put the effort in and you're able to put the time in, I don't think there is anything that is out of your reach. And I tell people that if you just start and you just get a move on and actually put the effort in from the start, I think anything is possible. And it's something that I've been really trying to do, and I know I have to do, and I know I have to put more effort in than other people because I'm not as skilled as other people, but I'm happy to do the work because I really enjoy it. And it's not something that necessarily other people technically enjoy. Other people could see this career as a job and just see it as something that earns them more money, but they're not actually enjoying it. So their effort level is already going to be below that of someone else who enjoys the craft, no matter how long they've been in the industry for, no matter how much skill they've got. I think in the end, they're not going to produce the results that I'm producing, and therefore people are going to start to see that, and people are going to start to move away from that type of person and sort of lean into someone who actually enjoys the craft more and in turn can produce more quality work. So that's just something to keep in mind. It was just something that I'd been thinking about and really enjoying in this book, and I hope to continue to learn a lot of things, and I have been through this book, but that was just one of the things that I wanted to touch on today. And so without further ado, let's jump into today's episode, and actually the thing that I really wanted to talk about, which is what's next. Now, the reason that I did title the episode that is because it is something that I do ask myself quite a lot, is what's next. And I think I've been talking a lot about the things that I've done right and about the things where I think I can help other people and things that I think I've learned along the journey and things that I think I can share with you guys and help you on your journey as well. But in today's episode, I really wanted to touch on something that I haven't been too crash hot at, and that is planning ahead, and that is looking at what comes next, because it's always been something that I've struggled with in being able to prioritize my own time and prioritize the things that I need to do in my own business and need to do in my own life as a whole. And that is really what I wanted to touch on today. I know I've spoken about this podcast being as much for me as it is for you guys, and I think today's episode is going to be a real testament to that, because I think I'm going to be learning along the go, and I think by just trying to put my ideas down in this episode, I think I'm going to be able to help myself a lot, and hopefully you guys will learn a lot about what my process is and learn about the things that I've been trying to research a lot and sort of gain some more understanding about, and hopefully you can take something away from that as well. This episode really stemmed from me just being a bit lost at work. As I said, this past week I've just been editing these photos from the wedding that I shot last weekend, and I feel like I've been getting into the grind of that and sort of leaving everything else behind. Up until I went and shot that wedding a couple of weeks ago, I was working, but I was also thinking that I had a lot of spare time because I wasn't actually working on the work that I would eventually be trying to do as a career. It's sort of in a weird stage of the work at the moment where sometimes I'll have heaps of editing work and other times I won't have any. And I know that eventually, hopefully, if I'm doing more work, I'm going to be doing more editing. So I need to get a lot better at prioritizing the hours that I spend editing and the hours that I spend on other tasks, because let's be real, there are other things that I do need to do in business. It's not just all editing photos. So I've got to be very strict with the priorities and know what it is that needs to be done next. And I had to think back the other day, because I thought just 3 weeks ago, I was spending my days completely differently and focusing on different things. So there must be other priorities out there. And I really wanted to try to get those down and try to work out what it is that I need to do next. It can be really hard sometimes, I think, when you're so heavily involved in the work that you can't actually see that you're procrastinating other work by working on other work. You know what I mean? So there are different things that I need to be trying to do, and by realizing where the priorities lie and not by focusing all my energy on this work over here, because I think one of the biggest things that hit me was I was really enjoying editing all these photos, but then I thought, well, what happens when I've ended all these photos? What happens when I've finished editing all these photos? I don't have any more work to go and do. So maybe the priority needs to be trying to find more work and then get back to editing these photos so that I have work once these photos are done. It's kind of that whole thing of what comes first, the chicken or the egg, because if I'm working and I'm not advertising the work, then how am I going to get more work? But if I'm just advertising work I don't have, then I'm not going to get more work. So I've sort of got to do the work here, and I've got to edit these photos to then have them out to advertise the work that I do to then get more work. It's trying to know what area to try and focus energy in first, and where needs more energy and what needs to be done and what needs to be prioritized, because there is some work that is more urgent than other work, but some work that is more important than other work, and realizing where everything lies on that spectrum is super important in trying to know what needs to come next. So the first step really for me is to write all these things down, is to write a basic to-do list, because I'm a big fan of actually writing to-do lists. I always have one on my computer, and I have one kind of in the short term and kind of in the long term as well. I have things that I know I need to do eventually and things that I know I need to do today. And I think that is a great way to keep on top of all the things that I need to do, because for me, I'm a very forgetful person. And if I think, I really need to do that, but I don't need to do it until next week, I'm not going to prioritize it right now, but by the time it gets to next week, I'll have already forgotten about it. So I need to be able to have a way to put that down somewhere and be able to get back to it a bit later, because chances are it's an important thing to do, but it may not be a priority right now. So being able to write that down and have that somewhere is super important for me, because, as I said, I'm a forgetful person and I'll forget about it by this time next week. I like to write all my notes and all my to-do lists in the app Notion. If you haven't heard of it, it's a great app that allows you to write notes on your phone, but also have them on the computer. They have a web page as well that I like to work when I'm at the computer. It's easy to bring the web page up and sort of add things there, and then they're on the phone so that when I'm out on the go and I think of something, I can quickly add it there and it'll be right back. I have lists for books I want to read. I have lists for ideas for the podcast, ideas for things I want to post on Instagram, things that I would like to write blog posts about, all different things like that. I tend to make lists of in Notion and be able to keep those ideas there. I like to think of it as sort of my other brain, because I don't want to have all that information stored in my head, because chances are I'm going to forget all of them. And having a list somewhere that I can easily access at home, but also access away, I think is a great thing for me, because I think most of my ideas I have while I'm out on the go. So being able to write them down then and there and not just forget about them, because I will forget about them in half hour, they'll be gone by the time I get home. So I like to be able to write them down and be able to keep ideas for everything, ideas for the podcast, as I said, ideas for things that I really want to be able to post about, but also things I know I need to do at work tomorrow. There are heaps of different apps out there you can use, apps with reminders and things to put down and actually make a strong to-do list, but I just like to be able to put things down that I know I need to do, and this isn't in a sort of priority order. This is just things I know I need to do, and then I'll try and sort them out a bit later on into priority. But I think it's so important to be able to put ideas down, because remembering them, and I think, just takes up too much brain power. And if we're being honest with ourselves, how many things have we forgotten to do because of the fact that we haven't written it down and we haven't reminded ourselves later on, because that we just thought we would remember. So I like to write everything down and write down very specific details that I know I will forget. After I write them down, I think it's easier to sort of sit back and have a look at them, because then I can sort of weigh up what the importance is versus the urgency of the task. So if I've got all these tasks, I need to know which ones need to be done first. I need to know which ones are actually important, because there are some things that I write down and I think, that's a great idea, but they're not really important to me. So they can be pushed off to a completely different time in a few months' time, when I have spare time, when I have a bit of downtime in work and I don't really have much else to do. Maybe that can go off then if they're not super important in the here and now. The urgency is also whether they need to be done first thing in the morning or whether they can be done end of next week. And understanding that urgency scale is super important, I think, because that is what allows you to know what is the next thing that needs to be done. There are things that need to be done straight away so that you can do the next step. And if you don't know that, if you get them the wrong way around and you're trying to do something before you've done something else, then you'll get halfway through one task and know, I've got to go back and do that before I can finish this task. And you're sort of just wasting a lot of time there. So knowing what is urgent can, in the end, save you a lot of time. And that's why I think it's so important to prioritize that as one of the earliest steps in sorting this whole stuff out. An example of this could be the photos that I'm editing for the wedding I shot last weekend. Yes, they're important, but they're not super urgent. I try and set myself about 3 to 4 weeks to get those sort of turned around. I don't want to drag them out too long, but I also don't want to have them to them within 2 weeks, because then I think if I hand them to them too early, I think it comes across that it's been a bit of a rush process, even though I may have spent the same amount of hours working on them as I would if I dragged it out over 3 weeks. Just if I send them to them earlier, they may think that it's been a bit of a rushed process, and they may not think that the work has been done as high quality as it could have been. And I don't want them to perceive it that way. So I just try and set myself that 3 to 4 week sort of deadline and know that I have that time to be able to work on them. There's no super urgency to get them out by the end of this week. So if I push back a little bit, that's okay. And there are other things that I know I need to be doing as well. I can't just spend 3 weeks whole working on editing photos, because I'll forget about a lot of other things in my business. And I think one of the important things to point out here is that urgency can be self-described. Right? So I can be able to make something urgent or not based on if I think it needs to be urgent or not. Like, I like to record this podcast on a Tuesday. I'm going to put that down as an urgent thing I need to do on a Tuesday. If I don't record the podcast, are there consequences? No, not really. But I've described it as something that I want to do and something that is urgent to me. So I need to be able to respect that and be able to keep that urgency on that thing. But equally so, if I'm working for someone else and they have a strong deadline on when the work needs to be done, yeah, of course I need to stick to that. And that's an urgency as well. So I need to keep those two urgencies exactly the same. Otherwise, work that I'm trying to do for myself and work that I'm trying to do to enhance my career is not going to seem as urgent as work that I'm doing for other people. And then I may as well just go work for someone else if I'm not going to respect the work that I prioritize for myself as much as I'm respecting the work that other people have handed to me. And then on that point, I think that it's equally as important to understand whether the work you're doing is actually driving your business forward, or whether it's just something that you think is important, but it actually isn't whatsoever. And this really comes into the whole importance scale rather than the urgency scale, because if we know something is urgent, I think it needs to be up very high on the priority list. But the importance scale, I think, is something that may not be urgent, but it may be important driving your business forward. And so some examples of this could be things that could save you time later on down the track. They may not be super urgent right now, but they're things that you know you need to do in your business in order to ensure that you have things to do or you're saving yourself time later on down the track. So these could be things like advertising. I run ads on Facebook and Instagram and things like that. So I need to prioritize actually having those out and having them consistent and having them already ready to go, because those ads can drive me traffic and drive people to my website and drive people to inquire with my business in order for me to get more business later on down the track. If I'm not prioritizing that here and now, whilst that might not be hurting me now, it could hurt me in the next 3 months because I won't have anyone inquire in 3 months. So I'm not going to have any work for that stage in time. So whilst it's important to get the work that I know I need to get done now, if I just speed through that and forget about the other things that I need to do, 3 months down the track, I won't have any more work. So that is why that is important. And other things like email automations and things like file management are things that could save me time later on down the track. If I prioritize automating my emails so that I'm not having to reply to every inquiry that comes in directly, and it can be automated and sent out with all the things and all my prices and things like that, I can easily divert the time that I would be spending on that in 3 weeks or in 2 weeks' time onto other things, because I've just spent a half day and organized all of that to automate itself so that in 3 weeks' time I don't have to answer emails every morning. And I think that this is one of the big things that I really came to in the past couple of days was like, hang on, I'm working here, but I'm working for someone else at the moment. I'm editing their photos, and whilst that's going to be great for my portfolio, I'm not really helping myself in the near future when I need to be advertising my services and I need to be making sure that I'm getting the word out there still so that I have work to do once this work is over. That is one of the biggest things for me in businesses is being able to know where your next client is going to come from. And so if you're not being able to put yourself out there, you're not exposing yourself to all the people that you possibly could be. And by just working here at my computer, I'm not exposing myself to anyone. So I really want to be putting myself out there as much as I can and being able to do those things earlier on and prioritize them higher than other work that I may be actually being paid for doesn't mean that I won't be paid for this other work a bit later on. And so once I have the things that I know I need to do, I like to compile them every day into a list of things that are my priorities for the day. So I like to stick to a list of probably about 3 or 4, maybe 5 items for the day. I don't like to go above that because I don't think that having too many things on your list can start to tempt you into working on other things that you probably shouldn't be working on. So if you can see a clear few things to do for the day, I think that's important. And then if you do run out of time, you can move on to something else on your to-do list maybe tomorrow or next week if that is something that you do. But I don't normally end more than 4 or 5 tasks per day. So that is why I like to stick to that. And these aren't small tasks. These aren't just answer an email to this person, answer another email over here, and then edit this photo to have it ready to post on Instagram. Like those aren't the 3 things that I'm having for the day. It's more broad than that, so that the things do take up more time. Like it might be answer all my emails, and that might take an hour and a half. Maybe it's record an episode of the podcast, which may only be a 45-minute episode, but I still go in a lot of planning beforehand. So I might do an hour of planning beforehand. I might record the podcast for an hour, and then I might just make sure that it's all ready to go and it's all on the hard drive. So that could take another half hour afterwards. So that actually takes up a fair chunk of the day. So these might not be small tasks, and I don't tend to break them up into small little things because I feel like I'm in the flow of I know what I need to do depending on the task. If it's a new task that I've never done before, maybe I'll break it up into smaller things. But I think I'm at a stage now where if I just record a podcast episode or edit all these photos for these people, I know what to do there. So I don't need to break those tasks up any smaller, but
it's important to have only a few things for me because I don't want to be tempted to chop and change. And that's one of the big things that I think, and the next thing that I really want to speak about is trying not to multitask, because for me, I've never found it something that I've been able to do. I've never found that it's the most productive thing to do. I like to set things and end them. And if that means just making the goal smaller, if that means just planning to edit 300 photos today rather than 500, then that's what it needs to be, and just aim for 300. And then once that's done, move on to the next thing. Rather than aiming for 500, at the end of 100 you say, oh, I'm so far off, I'm nowhere near it, let's move on to something else and come back. And by the time you've come back, you've already wasted so much time because you probably haven't spent the other time that you've now been using because you were so exhausted from the first task and still thinking about that first task. You've had to come onto that. By the time you come back, you're thinking, how was I going with that first task before? You've got to spend 15 minutes to get yourself into the flow again of it, and you end up wasting much more time. I like to be able to finish one task before I start on the second, and I think that's a big thing in why I only have 3 to 5 items on my list per day, because I don't allow myself options of things to go and do. If all the things are of equal hardness, as I might say, then I'm not going to jump onto one of the other tasks if it's just as hard as this task. I may as well get this one done and get it out of the way. And equally as important, if it's an urgent task, it needs to be done first, and so other things can be moved further on down the list. And it's equally as true that you need to be harsh on yourself as if you would be on anyone else, as if you would expect to be your own boss here, because you've got to be real with yourself and say, you made this list for a reason, and now you got to stick to it. You know, I don't want to be moving around and chopping and changing things on my list, because that defeats the purpose of the hour I just spent trying to write my list out. So I've got to stick to it now because I've just used that hour to write the list. If I just worked on anything from it, if I started working on other things, that defeats that purpose of that hour. So I'm losing more time, and I'm in turn not respecting myself enough so that next time I just think it's okay to go and move on to another thing. So prioritizing your time not only saves you time right now, but it saves you time in the future as well, because you're less likely to stray in the future if you've always stuck to that schedule. If you start straying away from it from the first few days, then it's going to be very hard to stick to in a few weeks, and you're going to be losing yourself and sort of moving off. So you've got to be harsh with yourself, and you've got to just set a few things and know what it is you're working on first. You know, I say all these things basically just speaking to myself here, because I know that that is something that I really need to do in not allowing myself to move on to other tasks before I've finished the first task, and really being strict to myself as my own boss, because it's never been something that I've been great at. But I really want to get this down on the podcast because it allows me to remember it a lot more, for one, but two, hopefully help you guys in the process of me going through this journey. You guys will hear some of these things as well and think, oh yeah, that's something that I need to work on as well in some other industry. No matter where you try and apply these things, I think these are things that you can apply all around the place. So hopefully this is able to help you guys, but also in turn, I think it's really helping me being able to get this stuff out into the podcast. And so then the last thing that I really try to do, and I think it's something that I've been working on, is the whole idea of reflection and trying to reflect on the tasks that I've been trying to do. I can often set myself goals in the medium to long term and be working towards them and get halfway through them and think, why am I still working towards this? Because in the short term, I've changed my goals and then changed the things that I've been working on, but haven't been reflected in the long-term goals. And I'm not really sure what I'm working on in the long term. And then in turn, I've got to change what my short-term goals are. So reflecting on why it is you're working towards something, I think is super important. Like, don't keep advertising on Instagram if it's not working for you. You know, don't keep automating your emails if every time you send out an automated email, you never hear a response, because the automated email you have isn't a very good email that people aren't interested in at all when you're just not responding to them. So maybe it is worth your time in going back and individually responding to every single inquiry, because sometimes it will impact different people in different ways. So understanding where those things do lie and sort of reflecting on the things that you have been trying to do and the changes that you could make, and making sure that primary goal that you had is still very relevant. And also lastly, don't be afraid of the sunken costs. Don't be afraid of the time that you've already invested in something. You know, I've been guilty of this before in spending a lot of time on my website, and I've been building a website out, and I've been building a couple of pages on my website and thinking, oh, I'm going to add this new page on my website. It's going to be really nice. It's going to give a lot of people a lot of information, or add this page here about information about something else. And then I get 80% of the way there and think, oh, I just don't think that's going to actually work. And I've just changed my whole style and now I'm trying to move into this other thing. So I don't think that page is going to work. But rather than continuing on and trying to upload it when you know it's not going to do anything, let's just move on. Like, I don't care about how much time I've used on trying to create that thing. If I've spent the last 2 days on it, if it's not going to work for me now and I've just reflected on that, I need to get rid of it and stop spending time on it now, rather than spending another day on it and not actually seeing results from it. So that is one of the things that I need to sit back on, and I think we all need to take a step back every now and again and sort of reflect on the tasks that we have been trying to achieve and the things that we've been trying to do, and actually see if they're actually working and if they're important or not. So I think that is just about where I'm going to leave today's episode, guys. I think that has been a very comprehensive overview of the things that I think I'm going to be trying to do moving forward, and the things that I've been really thinking about and trying to prioritize the work that I know I need to do, and trying to prioritize the work that I know is going to lead me in the right direction, but also make my life easier in the long term, and try to work on those urgent tasks as soon as I can. And I really hope you guys were able to draw something from this episode as well. I hope that it has been as informative for you as it has been for me, and I hope that you continue to come back here each week. And so if you have found this episode educational or enjoyable at all, I would love it if you guys could share this podcast around. It has been really helping me over the past few weeks. You guys have been sharing the podcast all over the place, and that has been really helping other people to be able to find this podcast. It's a relatively small podcast, and I know that, but I'm really enjoying being able to connect with new people and hearing from people who have been enjoying the podcast and being able to gain a lot from it. So I know that I'm being able to help some people, and it really inspires me to try and in trying to actually get this podcast out a bit further than it is now, and trying to cast that net a bit wider and try to help more people. And you guys are really big helpers on that. And I know that you will continue to share episodes that you find enjoyable, and I will continue to try and make episodes that you guys are finding enjoyable, because that is something for me. As much as I want this to be educational, I want it to be enjoyable as well. And so if you guys are finding any value in any of these episodes, I would really appreciate if you did share it around. And so with that said, guys, I hope you have a great week, and I hope to have you all back here again next week for a very interesting episode. I have an idea of the things that I want to record about next week, but I don't want to let you know just now. But I think it's going to be an interesting one for some of you people who are actually in a creative field and trying to drive a bit more interest in your work. So that is going to be something that I'm going to be trying to talk about next week, and I hope to have you guys back here listening again. But until then, have a great week, and I will speak to you all again next Monday. Bye.